Here's the problem, Scott. You can't let the players do whatever they want, not have some rules that have to be followed, right? We always had a rule to be members of the PGA Tour. You had to play a minimum of 15 events, and every player, including Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, followed those rules. Their tagline was, look, no player should be bigger than the game. And that's, I hope, the way the PGA Tour remains.
Hey, I'm Scott Savlov, and welcome to The Path here. And with me, friend, and I would say one of the finest representatives, the ambassador of golf, Brad Faxon. And I say ambassador of golf, not that you're going to wear a sash, Brad, but you kind of embody all that. When people describe golf, there's the good stuff that people talk about. You know, it's the only sport you can call a penalty on yourself. It's a gentleman's sport. It's a ladies' sport. It's something where people go to have a good time, but also to be kind to one another. And you kind of exemplify all of that. If I had to describe you, that's how I would describe you. You are kind of the competitive player, but also ambassador of golf. What do you think of that?
Well, Scott, I kind of think when you call somebody an ambassador, it's a kind way of saying that they're old or older.
No, yeah. You could
in a lot of ways.
It's just someone else hasn't demonstrated it for any length of time at all. You know, someone could be the ambassador of baseball. They're currently playing. They represent everything that's good about baseball.
Look, I get it. It's a very nice thing to hear. I would say that, you know, you couldn't be your second year on the PGA Tour and be an ambassador of the game. You know, I played 35 years competitively. And there's kind of a little corollary. I signed a recent extension of my contract with the Acushnet Company. Acushnet's the parent company of Titleist and FootJoy. I grew up close to their headquarters in Massachusetts, and my new contract's going to extend to my 40th year with the company. And I started thinking about that as an ambassador, 40 years. I wonder if there's anybody else with any equipment company that's been with one longer. And one of my friends that worked for Acushnet, then went to Wilson Golf, I asked him, Ed Abrain, I said, Ed, have you ever had any athlete be longer than 40 years? He goes, well, as a matter of fact, we were paying Gene Sarazen, who was the first Masters champion, or had the famous shot, second year.
Created the sandwich too.
Right. But they started paying Gene Sarazen at 22, and they were paying him when he passed away at 102. So
you got some years to go.
80. Yeah. You know, you're saying there's still a chance.
Yeah, I like it. So he would have been a gentleman of the sport, an ambassador of golf. How about that?
Correct. So I like it. And I know, to me, if somebody asked me, you know, to define that in our sport, it's someone that played the game for a long time, represented a company for a long time maybe, but was also involved in the politics of the game maybe. You know, I was on the PGA Tour's policy board a few different times. And, you know, now I'm old enough now that I was lucky enough in my first year on the tour to have played with Arnold Palmer. I met Ben Hogan and Sam Snead and Gene Sarazen. I got to play with Tiger Woods and, you know, when he was 14 or 15 years old, and played on a Ryder Cup with him. So I've spanned a great generation or two of the game of golf.
You were born in Oceanport, New Jersey, right? I'm a New Jersey guy myself, actually born in Brooklyn, but grew up in New Jersey. But I would say you are known for, you know, when people talk to me about Rhode Island, and I'm going to Rhode Island, the first person I think of to call is you, to say, okay, they're going to Providence. Where are you going to go eat? I went, if you remember this, a few years back, Kurt Russell and I were driving, and we're driving up to Providence. We're going to go do something up there. And first call, I said, you know, hey, let's find out the right restaurant to go to. It's called Brad. So we call Brad Faxon. And you sent us to an Italian restaurant that had the best chicken parm. It was amazing. And then Kurt, of course, ordered, just so you know, liver and onions, which is just like crap to me. And he orders this at your restaurant. So I'm like, and he loves liver and onions. And then he wants to try the chicken parm, which I told him, not going to happen. This thing is so good, not going to share it with you.
The city of Providence has a tremendous amount of Italians, especially in North Providence. And they have an area called Federal Hill. If you looked into the history of Rhode Island, a lot of the mafia home base was somewhere up near Federal Hill. That always meant good restaurants, good Italian restaurants. And Brown University is not far away, and all the celebrities, whether it was Danny DeVito or Bruce Springsteen, they always go there and eat at Al Forno, which wasn't on Federal Hill, but you could drive up and down Atwells Avenue in Providence, where Federal Hill is, and on both sides of the street for about a mile, you can't go wrong. I think the fact that there were so many Italians there and they made such great food that it was a hard place to miss. And we have Johnson and Wales, the great culinary school there, where it was founded. So people come there to learn how to be great chefs too. And just to correct you on the Rhode Island and the Oceanport, New Jersey, my dad went to a military school in Vermont called Norwich, Norwich University. And my grandfather had served in the Army. My father got stationed after graduating in New Jersey at Fort Monmouth, which was in Oceanport. My mother had gone to another Vermont school, an all-women's school there called Green Mountain. They got married young, seemed like all my friends' parents did. And we moved to Germany after I was 2 months old and lived in a base in Frankfurt for a couple of years before moving back. And that's where we established the Rhode Island roots. So people say born in New Jersey, but I am a Rhode Islander. Proud of it, proud of the heritage, the state, the golf that was there. And so many great friends and family.
Describe for me Barrington. I mean, that's kind of your hometown, right? In Rhode Island, Barrington. I would say you're the pride of Barrington. Describe what your childhood was like in Barrington.
Barrington would have been known as one of the 4 or 5 towns in Rhode Island that had the best public schools. And when my dad got back from Germany, he was working for a gas company, Fall River Gas Company. He was digging. He used to say digging ditches to put pipe in there, gas pipes down, and he kind of learned the business from the ground up, literally. Barrington, Rhode Island had a great golf course called Rhode Island Country Club, a Donald Ross course that my dad was a member at. He was a very good player, a club champion there. His whole family, his brother and sisters, were great players. My grandfather was a great golfer. So golf was in the blood.
So he taught you, basically?
Yeah, he wasn't ever a guy that tried to give me lessons. I heard the same phrases that you would read in a book: keep your head down, keep your left arm straight, don't look up, follow through, all those things. But my parents got divorced when I was younger, and I lived with my mom and my sister. And I got a lucky break in this town when I was 12 years old. One of my neighbors that lived down the street was a year older than me and told me we could make money as a caddy at Rhode Island Country Club. So we biked up to Rhode Island Country Club. This was, 1973. I'm 12 years old. He's 13. And that's where I learned to caddy. And, you could make $4 for a bag, but there was a real regimented program there. They had a caddy master, and you had A and B caddies. You had caddies that carry 1 or 2 bags. And I ended up learning a lot about life, golf, etiquette, rules, how to play, how to be around people that were successful. So it kind of gave you goals. It made me a little bit more driven to be successful. And, my dad was still very involved in my life, and we played a lot of golf together. But I think working in the locker room, having the head professional was a guy named Federico Bruno, and he grew up in North Providence. He was the hardest working man I'd ever met in my life. He would show up every morning at 5 o'clock and wash his car in the parking lot of the club, make sure it was shiny every day. Then he'd put on blue Sandsabelt slacks and a white Pickering shirt with a blue Rhode Island Country Club logo, and he wouldn't leave until every range ball was plucked from the range at 8:30 every night. It was remarkable to see that, and I've never seen anybody that was more driven to succeed, and it was perfect. And I got a break from my father because I worked as a busboy. I was a newspaper guy, just trying to make money any way I could, obviously caddy. And as I was getting to be a better golfer, maybe 14, I was a freshman in high school. I had won the state junior championship. I was getting to play pretty good. And my dad made a great deal with me after my sophomore year in high school. He says, look, I see you getting pretty good at golf. And he said, you're making maybe a couple $1,000s a year working, and I thought that was nice, a lot. He says, if you treat golf as your job, he said, I will let you stop caddying and stop working in the locker room because you can earn yourself a scholarship, which will save me a lot more money than what you're making.
Wow.
And it was a handshake agreement. I think I need to give my dad more credit than I have for this because it really, I wanted to play, and I had been a hockey player in the winter.
That's what I was going to ask you. Did you do any other sports? Because, in that neck of the woods, your season is not as long as, Southern California or where you are in Florida. I mean, your season's short.
Yeah, and you didn't have a choice. You had to play other sports. And my dad played hockey in college. We were close to New Hampshire and Vermont to ski. I played baseball. I was a regular kid. I felt like I had a pretty diverse upbringing. School was always important and grades were important. But I think what we're finding in the game now is the importance for development, physical and cognitive development for kids is to have that, well-rounded upbringing, and the motor skills you learn from playing other sports are really, really important. You don't know about that as a young kid. I didn't know that skiing might help my golf, or table tennis might help my golf, or squash or hockey. The eye-hand coordination, the balance, all helped me later in my career without knowing. And we know now that early specialization in sport is very dangerous for longevity in so many ways, and injury avoidance too.
Today's episode is sponsored by True Classic. I wear t-shirts all the time for lots of occasions. So let's talk t-shirts. Finding the correct t-shirt can be challenging, either too tight or plain big and boxy. True Classic wants to make every man feel good and look good too. Tighter fit in the chest and arms so the t-shirt looks like it was made just for you. All of their styles are super soft and the collars stay in place, not droopy like so many other t-shirts. It's time for you to get rid of the old ones and upgrade to True Classic. I did, just wearing it as a t-shirt or under a sweater. It's the perfect shirt. We have an exclusive deal for our listeners and viewers. We want to hook you up with some True Classic. For a limited time only, get 25% off with the code PATH at trueclassic.com. Get comfortable, get going, and upgrade your wardrobe with True Classic. Get 25% off at trueclassic.com with code PATH. Free shipping included on purchases over $100 and 100% risk-free guarantee with a 30-day return policy. True Classic. When you look good, you feel good. I think the amazing thing for you is also an appreciation for seasons. I mean, when you guys turn, that's where people go to look at the changing of the leaves is New England, and that's your upbringing. But when it's cold, it's cold. It's not like fool around cold where when you're a kid, you probably just don't even know any better, right? I mean, for you, you'd go out and play because that's what you were doing. Your friends are out there playing and you're outside. It is compared to, today, if you're going to go play golf up there in November, you're like, I don't know. It could be like 50, 40. I don't know. It's just, why do that? Right. When you were a kid to play golf, it was March and it's 48 degrees, but you're given that chance to play, you're out there. It doesn't matter what the temperature is. And if you're playing hockey
Without
on a pond, it could be 10 degrees, didn't really matter.
It didn't. And without a doubt, our high school golf team started April 1st. And if I go back there in Rhode Island now in April, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we were playing tournament golf then. Because the golf courses weren't really ready that early in the season. And the memberships at the clubs in the fall in Rhode Island, where it was so beautiful, didn't want to give up their courses to a high school team in September and October. It was just too valuable. Right. But what it did do, and when people ask, geez, how did you become a golfer in Rhode Island and make it out on the PGA Tour? First of all, I tell them, look, there were a lot of Rhode Islanders that made it on the PGA Tour. Billy Andrade, of course, Brett Quigley, who's playing the senior tour now. His uncle Dana played the senior tour, won 17 titles on the senior tour. We had a handful of other guys that were from Rhode Island or touched Rhode Island that got on the tour for at least a little bit. And I tell people, if you think about the greatest golfers in the world, you can say Jack Nicklaus is from Ohio, Tom Watson's from Kansas City, Arnold Palmer is from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. So they weren't playing golf year round, and I think that helps you as a youngster. Now, I see a lot of parents now when they get a kid that's pretty good and they live in Minnesota or Maine, they try to move them somewhere south. But a lot of times it's pretty good to leave them where they are because you learn to play in adverse conditions, which if you watch golf, we know every time we play, it's not perfect out there.
But the thing today is to get scholarships and to do all these things, it's so competitive. And the instructors like Brad Faxon live in Florida, and guys live in Texas and Georgia and Southern California and Arizona. So a lot of parents, when they think they have a prodigy kid, they want to gravitate to try to get those coaches to work with their kids to give them the best shot they can. I think that's kind of a different mindset than when we were kids. No one even knew, if you were lucky enough and you had a guy like Bob Tosky at your club and he's your golf pro and he's teaching you how to play golf, people forget he was a club pro. He's a really good club pro. But if that was the guy who taught you how to have a grip, otherwise you're hoping that you have a dad like yourself who could teach you the correct way to grip the club and make sure that grip looks good and feels good and strengthens your game as you get older. Fascinating for you. You went to Furman. Okay. So now let's talk about that for a second. You're in Rhode Island. There are a lot of Rhode Island, or New England schools. How did you were an accomplished quality junior golfer, as you said, won state titles. You literally got on the map as a high school student playing golf. And so how did you pick Furman versus other schools that may have been looking at you or you were looking at them?
Two things happened. First of all, being a Rhode Islander, I had never heard of Furman. My grandfather, who I mentioned, was a golf guy. He used to take some time out to go to Sea Island, Georgia in the wintertime, which wasn't an up and developed place like it is now, but it was far enough south. He had some friends there, and one of his neighbors was a guy that worked at Furman that was in development. And my grandfather he used to teach at Boston University. He wanted me to get an education first. He would have been very old school that nothing can replace a great education. And he wanted me to stay up north, potentially go to Ivy League school, which I probably wouldn't have been smart enough to get into. But he heard about Furman, learned a little bit more about it from his new friend down there, and said, yeah, Brad, this is a good school, good liberal arts education. And then couple that with the fact that my golf was improving, but I wasn't really being sought after by the top schools. And back then, the top college schools would have been Wake Forest, Florida, Georgia. I knew I wanted to go southeast to get in some warm weather. And then there were other schools like Ohio State and
USC,
maybe a Brigham,
ASU.
Yeah, USC was a good team. So I didn't get highly recruited. I happened to be at one of the few national junior tournaments after my junior year. And I saw a man with a Furman shirt on. It was a white shirt with purple Furman and blocks. And I looked at the guy and said, hi, you the coach at Furman? He goes, yes, I am. My name's Gary Meredith. I said, well, my name's Brad Faxon. I'm interested in going to your school. We had a little chat. He goes, where are you from? I said, Rhode Island. He started laughing. He goes, I've never heard of a golfer from Rhode Island before. And, it ended up, a couple handwritten letters later, I was offered a $400 a year scholarship to go to Furman. And, tuition back then was $13,000. I think it's $70,000 now if you went to school at Furman. But I had a couple other little offers, none better than really Furman. And what I liked about Furman is I knew I would make that team, and I knew I would play against Wake Forest and play against Georgia and Florida and the better teams. And I thought, you know what, maybe that's a better play for me. So after I accepted the $400 to go to Furman, I had a really good summer my after graduating senior year. Like I won a couple national tournaments, and I started getting phone calls. And the coach from Wake Forest, the coach from Ohio State called me, and it was too late. And there were a couple times when I was at Furman that I thought, my team's not as good as I wish they would be. But my schedule stayed strong. Ultimately, golf's going to be an individual sport when I get out of school. And it turned out to be a nice choice.
You were College Player of the Year, correct?
I was on my senior year. Yeah, I made. I think what was a big influence to me, continuing my push or drive to be the PGA Tour players. There's All-Americans awards are given out at the end of every year, and there's this plaque that's still given out with a list of the first, second, and third team All-Americans all on this one plaque. And there were a couple alums from Furman that had made honorable mention All-American a few years before I got there, and I looked at these plaques, and there were about 4 of them up in the golf shop. Every player that was on the first team All-American had made it to the PGA Tour for some amount of time. And I said to myself, if I can get on the first team All-American, I'll have a really good shot at being a PGA Tour player. My junior year, I had a great year. Then did the same thing my senior year. So I knew and made first team the last 2 years. So that really kind of gave me the confidence that this career path of professional golf would maybe pan out.
What was your major at Furman?
I was an econ major. And, the most sophisticated business majors there where, you could take finance, accounting, or econ. That was it. There were no
specified,
other.
Right.
Specified majors. And I think I chose econ because there were 2 less required courses to graduate with a BA. And the funny story about Furman for me is they were an academics first school. I had an accounting class, intro accounting class my freshman year, and the professor was a assistant baseball coach. Fred Current was his name. We called him Overhead Fred because he always used to push this overhead down the hallway. And the first tournament we had that fall, I said, hey, Mr. Current, I'm going to go to this tournament I'm missing Thursday and Friday, and we had a test on that Thursday and Friday. Well, you don't think you could just go to any tournament and make this test up? That's not how we work here. And I'm like, oh boy, I thought a coach, as an athletic coach, might be a little bit
more lenient,
less stricter. Yeah, and I was like, oh, I didn't like that. So I learned quickly that my grades were going to be important, and certainly it mattered to keep your eligibility. And I was doing okay in school, and then I had taken all my classes, but for my 4 years, as early as possible. And I never had a class afternoon. I was so devoted to the game that I would get up in the mornings and go hit balls before my 8 o'clock class, and not many college kids were doing that. And then the econ senior year, when things started to get a little tough and you're taking micro theory, macro theory, senior seminar, all these classes, we were on trimesters. And the final semester, my senior year, I had done well enough that I was, I was like a 3.2 student in grade point average in my major, which I thought was good, missing some classes. And this last term, my senior seminar professor, Dr. Roberts, handed out a syllabus for the schedule. And the first headline on the syllabus was, if you miss more than 5 classes, you'll fail. No questions. And I'm like, oh my God. So I looked at the golf schedule, and now I was really good. I was All-American. We had a big schedule lined up that was March, April, May. I was going to miss 17 days. And I was right on time to graduate. And I think, like you said, I had the respect of the school then. And there was a professor, the head of academics was a guy named Dean Anderson. And he was a runner and a golfer. So I looked at the syllabus and said, I'm going to miss 17 days. I'm screwed. Because I wanted to graduate, but I knew I was going to turn pro that summer. And I went to Dean Anderson and I said, Dean, I'm a good student. I love Furman. I'm having a great career here in golf at the school. I just got into econ or senior seminar, and Dr. Roberts said if I miss 17 classes, if I miss 5 classes, I'm going to fail. And I said, I'm going to miss 17 with our golf schedule, but I won't come back to graduate if I miss this. And that will be really disappointing because you've spent a lot of money on me and I've spent a lot of time here. And I think there's something we should be able to work out. I was trying to negotiate probably a non-negotiable situation. And I left, and the next class we had, and by the way, these classes they were Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. So only time I've had to go to class in the afternoon. And the next class, seminar with Roberts, he hands out a new syllabus, and there were only 5 of us in this class. And he canceled 12 days of class. And I'm like, oh my God, Dean Anderson, I love you. But I got picked on all year long by Dean, and I was told, you cannot tell any of the kids in your class what happened.
That's awesome.
And that happened, and it was a miracle. And I ended up pulling off a B. I think at the end of the term, Dr. Roberts had respect because I worked my tail off in that class just to kind of show him that I wasn't trying to, pull any punches here.
You did well. You came out, you win 8 tournaments on the PGA Tour, 21 total professional wins, which is also some international stuff, correct?
Yeah, no, I played a lot overseas. I got friendly in the late 80s with Ian Baker Finch, the Australian who won the 91 Open Championship at Birkdale. As a matter of fact, I was with him the last couple days playing in the tournament with him, and he really influenced me to come down there and play in Australia. I always thought it was cool with the Americans that would leave the comfort of being in America to go play a British Open or travel to play the Australian Open. I went to play in Europe, and I thought, if you want to be one of the best players in the world, you had to play internationally, where most of the Americans kind of just stuck in the U.S.
For you, when you go to Australia, in thought, did you spend time with Greg Norman then?
Yeah. No, we both lived in Orlando. When I got on the tour, he was living in Orlando. And like Baker Finch, he was a guy that I played as much golf with as I could. He was the number 1 player in the world for a long time in the early 90s, in particular, when I was starting to become a better player. I won my first real official event in 1991 and 2. I played practice rounds with Greg as much as I could. I even played a practice round with him on Wednesday of the 1996 Masters, which is where he famously lost his 6-shot lead to Nick Faldo. We played a twosome late in the day on Wednesday, just me and Greg. And, he was a guy I would have played with in Australia, gone there because of him. And I won the Australian Open in 1994. That was a big deal to be able to do that.
And there's so many great golf courses there. Obviously Royal Melbourne, people know of that, but there's a lot of really great golf down in Australia. So you had a great opportunity, in the weather, our winter time is their summertime. So you're perpetually in, the Rhode Island kid is officially 12 months of warm weather. So that's kind of nice too.
Oh, it was really nice. And if you looked at the Australian Open trophies called the Stonehaven Cup, and if you look at the past champions there, it's remarkable how many players would have won down there. We mentioned Saracen, Hagen, Palmer, Nicholas, Player, Norman, a bunch of Australian guys. It's remarkable how Rory McIlroy, many players went down there to play. And you could argue that in the city of Melbourne, you mentioned Royal Melbourne, there's Kingston Heath, there's Metropolitan, there's Yarra Yara, there's so many, Huntingdale, there's so many great places that you can play down there. It's as good as any in the world.
You know, for you, your international play, you're on 2 Ryder Cup teams. As you mentioned earlier, you're on a Ryder Cup team, 2 Ryder Cup teams. Your game, I mean, you're a great player, but from the moment I started watching golf and you were playing, always regarded as the best putter on the PGA Tour. Always the guy everyone would look at, for putting and just that stroke that you had. Tell me, is that something that you had when you were like a younger player, or is it just confidence in your game? I mean, to develop that kind of reputation requires you to be consistent and pretty damn good.
Yeah. So it's, you could, when people say you're lucky maybe that you were just born a good putter, that bugs me a little bit.
Got to work at it.
I think we learned the skill, right? And I did it by spending endless hours on the putting green as a kid, not even knowing I wasn't calling that practice. I was just playing. Right. And I got good at reading greens by caddying, because you had the members that wanted your help. So I learned how to read a green, and I spent time studying a little bit how balls break and what it looks like. And then my statistics were good in putting when I first got on the tour, but they weren't remarkable. And then they got great into the early 90s and through 2005 and 6. And I won the putting title, I think 3 different times, and I was 35 to 40. So, people think that you're born with it or you're not. And I got better as I got older. I think that's encouraging to people that I teach, that you can get better at this. And I had some help from other players asking them questions. Ben Crenshaw's one, who would have been one of the greatest players, the greatest putters that ever lived. Bob Rotella was a huge influence in my life, one of the first sports psychologists to come out of the game. And I think we all know putting has so much of a mental side to it. It can drive you crazy. I don't think I ever let putting drive me crazy. And then there's, to me, how you deal with missing is an important part. I call it the post-shot routine rather than the pre-shot routine, because when you start remembering your bad shots and your bad putts rather than forgetting them, you're in trouble. Right. And that's the hardest thing to do. And there was a great Mark Twain quote in one of Rotella's books that it's the inability to forget is infinitely more devastating than the inability to remember. And I love that quote. And I could repeat it if you think it would be worthwhile. But the inability to forget is infinitely more devastating than the inability to remember. So you want to be able to have a long-term memory of your successes, right? And I think that's what I did better than most people, because I putted well for a long time. I got really good at it in the late 80s through even 2005 or 6 when I was 45 and 6 years old.
For you, when you were playing, did other players seek you out for suggestions to have you look at their putting game?
Always, and they weren't formalized lessons more than they were conversations. And we were theorizing, I guess, a lot of time, or sharing stories about feels, technique a lot of times. And, Tom Kite said he was told by his great teacher, Harvey Penick, who also taught Kathy Whitworth and Ben Crenshaw, that, one of the secrets to golf is to go to dinner with good players or go to dinner with good putters. And that boded well for me. I didn't want to sit around listening to somebody complain about how unlucky they were. That didn't work well for me. And I wanted to be around positivity all I could. I wanted to have fun when I did it. And it's funny, when you asked about my dad and lessons and other kids and lessons, I mean, right now there's so much access, right, to information, whether it's on any of the social media channels, just going to YouTube. Almost every instructor has the ability to do some sort of things online. Too much instruction can be dangerous. I think that when I mentioned that Ian Baker Finch and I talked about having just a putter, a golf ball, and a hole, we figured out a lot of stuff on our own. What felt good, what didn't feel good, maybe how to correct stuff that you might not know if you were just only being told what to do rather than figuring out. And I would say, for any of your listeners, if you're a parent and you have kids, all the parents that if I teach their kids, they want like this, they want a syllabus or an itinerary for what their kids should be doing every minute of the day. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know if that's what you need. I don't know if you need to program every hour that this kid needs to be doing a specific task. I don't think that's what I'm seeing great players have.
In your mind, who's the most talented hands that you ever saw? I mean, when I say hands, meaning that's short game, it could be anything, but it's players notice those things. When I'm around real good golfers, it's just like in baseball. I could watch a pitcher and know how he's releasing the ball and where he's releasing the ball. I could see it. And I could see the pitch, right, where a lot of people just watch people throw the ball. For you, when you're watching guys, you're watching their hands, you're watching a lot of different movements. But hands are really a real dictating kind of determination,
oh my God.
So
yes.
who in your mind, in the length of your career, who had the best hands?
Well, let me go back and say that in my early years on the tour, when I was watching somebody that was really good chipper and putter, one of the compliments you'd hear is, "Hey, great job, nice touch. You got great feel." You would say, "Great hands." That was a compliment you gave to someone, and we don't hear that anymore. It's like all the instructors now are trying to take hands and small muscles out of the swing, and I'm like, huh? I want to add that. Every once in a while we're talking today, I have my gamer putter here, and I just like to feel my hands on this grip. It feels good to me. The best hands, I would say, were both Spaniards, Seve Ballesteros and Jose Maria Olazabal. But I could also put down players like Raymond Floyd and Hubert Green and Corey Pavin. Even a player named Mark Brooks had great hands. And they had different and unique styles. It wouldn't have been cookie cutter like you see so many of the players of today. And when we watch, if I look at somebody with great hands, great chipping right now, Jordan Spieth would jump out as one of the greatest chippers. Shane Lowry, the Open champion from a few years ago, the Irishman, awesome chipper. Those guys have great hands. Abraham Answer, the Mexican, great hands. Those are some of the players that I see that just look like they're born with a club in their hand.
You work with one of the greatest players in the last 15 to 20 years, in being Rory McIlroy. And people always say, well, how come Rory hasn't won more? And that's a really hard thing to say, because there's lots of factors that go into winning a tournament, not just playing, but dominating. Rory, if you look at it, is one of the great players, always competing and always carries himself well. How do you work with someone like that? I mean, he obviously has got great skill set, doesn't need any of us to tell him, get him to the first tee and make him play well. But at the end of the day, when it comes to Brad Faxon, what does he come there for?
Well, you're right. He's one of the most talented and gifted players of our lifetimes, and certainly of this generation. And he's just turned 33. He's won 4 major championships, 22 PGA Tour events, another dozen on the European Tour. And he said to me earlier this year that, when he first turned pro at 17, he's played professionally half his life. He didn't think he could play much past mid-30s, and now that he's 33, he thinks 50's young. So he would know enough about history to know that, Phil Mickelson didn't win any of his 6 majors prior to the age of 32, and Ben Hogan won all 9 of his majors after the age of 34, that there's still plenty of time. You would call Rory, based on his talent, an underachiever, even though he's one of the winningest players we have on the course today. I feel honored because not only is he as gifted as there is, he's a gentleman. He's an ambassador. He's one of the smartest guys I've been around. He's incredibly book smart for someone that never finished high school, people smart, and driven. And I think that, we haven't really talked about Saudis and LIV Golf.
I want to get to that,
he's bared that burden on his shoulders to represent the PGA Tour with Tiger Woods' help. And he's found this quiet spot between the ropes now, and it's helped him to play better.
For Rory, he is the voice of the PGA Tour. You mentioned you were on the policy board. When I was doing an event that I always try to get you in, and timing never worked, VH1's Fairway to Heaven. And it was right after the Monday after the Las Vegas Invitational. And I remember walking up to you, and you were coming out of the tour trailer and just approaching, and you just had another commitment that you had to go to. Rory, so I view you as the embodiment of a PGA Tour lifer. You are exactly, so for you to empathize or go and sympathize with LIV Tour would be shocking to me because of your background. Rory is kind of the same model, right? You guys all live in the same area of Florida. Greg Norman lives near you guys. You guys go to, say, the Publix, your local grocery store. Rory walks in and he sees, not that Sergio lives there anymore because Sergio lives in Texas, but if he runs into Sergio or Dustin Johnson in your local grocery store, in today's golf, it's not like what it was, what you were talking about. How do these guys navigate through those waters?
I think, they've been friends for a long time, so I don't know how personal you would take it against Dustin Johnson, but I mean, the LIV Golf has real money, and they're throwing around big dollars up front, which players have never seen before. They came with the premise that the best players in the world should play together more often, which is probably a true statement. The PGA Tour's reacted strongly with anteing up on the purse structures. But I think, we've talked about Greg Norman, and he's the CEO of the LIV Golf and representing the players there. And trying to say that, hey, look, you guys are going to be independent contractors. You should be independent contractors. You should be making a lot of money. And it looks like they're anything but independent contractors. They're all being told they have to go to play other tournaments to get world ranking points. That's a big thorn in their side, that they don't have those points to keep their players exempt from not being in the top 50, which they need to be to get in the major championship. So, it's contentious now. There's legal action here from both sides, suit, countersuit.
Can they bridge the gap? Can they find a common ground, in your opinion?
God, I don't see how they do that now. I think I don't think the Saudis are going to go away. We know how much money they have. I think that, Norman has separated himself too because he doesn't want a truce. I think he's got a vendetta against the PGA Tour.
Now that's 20 years old or 25 years old. Yeah.
Yes, 1994. It's sad because I think golf has been in such a great place.
To me, people ask me, the LIV Tour guys are upset because they're not getting the points. And I'm like, if they're so upset, all you got to do is open up your phone to your app on your bank account, and you look there and you see a nice fat check in there, or fat, numbers with a lot of zeros. Takes a little of the pressure away, a little of the stress away. If you wanted to win majors, then you stay on the PGA Tour. It's not that hard.
Yeah, it's not. And Tiger, when he flew up to Jacksonville, the Players Championship with Ricky Fowler, and kind of had a plan together, he and Rory and Jay Monahan, our commissioner, worked together. And Tiger's comments were strong. I think he said, how would you ever even get up in the morning if you knew that you were given that amount of money and it didn't matter how you played? He said, that's not how I work. And I think it showed a lot about who the players that left, really are, what are they thinking about? And they were either hugely misinformed by their agents to think that the tour wasn't going to take some kind of action and have a suspension. I don't think any of them thought the court would overturn the ruling as quickly as they did, so they can't play in PGA Tour events. I think it's remarkable. And
But Brad, what about the argument also, the PGA Tour is in bed with China and the Chinese government? How do you combat that conversation from a neutral party looking at the LIV Tour guys as, they're whining about this? PGA Tour looks like it got punched in the nose by LIV Tour, which it has. But at the same time, if other people said, look, guys, the PGA Tour has been in bed with China for the last X number of years, and they don't have a great reputation there. How do you defend that?
Well, if you start to talk about all the different, I guess, moral discrepancy, how do you want to say it? What's happening in the sweatshops? If you want to get political about it, you can get political in almost any part of the country. You can get political in any part of our states and cities. When the PGA Tour partnered with China to help grow the game down there, knowing that there were going to be television rights down there, that the population of China was going to certainly entertain that. They started the PGA Tour of China. They helped them with their growth of the game. That was a PGA Tour initiative. This wasn't a PGA Tour initiative. The Saudis coming here. This is a hostile takeover. It's exactly the opposite.
That's true.
They didn't come here calling the PGA Tour and saying, hey, we'd like to help you grow the game in Saudi Arabia. And look, we know that all kinds of Fortune 500 companies have invested in China, in Saudi Arabia, and a bunch of the Saudi Arabian companies or their funds are in these American companies. So I don't know. You lose the political argument to me a little bit. I know there's certain things that are just horrific there with what happened. And I don't know, at some point are the Saudis going to look at a return on investment and say after 3 or 4 years, you know what, we're out of here.
They spent $3 billion in 3 years. It's at some point you got to get some return. But
you would think. But now I also think that Greg Norman he's pretty driven to stick a nail in the PGA Tour and stop them from going forward without having to make some big changes and allow both tours to live together. But here's the problem, Scott. You can't let the players do whatever they want and not have some rules that have to be followed, right? We always had a rule to be members of the PGA Tour. You had to play a minimum of 15 events. And there were other rules when you wanted to go play overseas that you had to follow. And every player, including Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, followed those rules. And their tagline was, look, no player should be bigger than the game. And that's, I hope, the way the PGA Tour remains. And look, the top players need to be compensated. It's not the model we were used to. But when a player like Rory McIlroy goes to play in a tour event and doesn't make the cut and doesn't get paid anything, he's contributed to that event immensely. And I think they're trying to figure out a way for our top tour players to get some kind of compensation.
I know you've got to go now, but I'd love to have you back on, because sitting right behind you are some clubs and some bags. And what most people don't know about Brad Faxon, you're a tinkerer too. You create your own like teaching aids and you design this kind of stuff. And I kind of want to revisit that with you at another time so we could get into the mind of, like, it's almost like, a scientist. So I need to ask you, do you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and, you come into your little workshop there and do that? So we have to revisit that. But I want to thank you for coming on the path. They were talking a little bit about your game, talking a little bit about, what's going on currently in our lives, the LIV sport idea, the Saudis, political or non-political, there's talk that they may go into tennis. And again, people may think, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal when you start selling out all of these little things where people feel uncomfortable doing what you've grown up doing. And all of a sudden, if somebody else owns that kind of stuff or owns you, it's a completely different mindset. So I appreciate you being able to speak freely with me and talk about that. And I thank you for coming on. And one of the great golf coaches, one of the great golf people, I still maintain one of the great ambassadors of the game without a sash on, is Brad Faxon. And Brad, thanks for coming on the path here. And we look forward to visiting with you down the road a little bit.
Thanks, Scott. You've been a good friend for a long time. You are an ambassador yourself, and it's great to be on the path here.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to write us on thepathhere.com to have one of your questions featured on a future episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Scott Savlo. If you want to send us a tweet or follow us on Instagram, it's at The Path Here Podcast. Hey, I'm Scott Savlov, and you've been listening to The Path Here.